I want to make sure it's clear to everybody in this chamber and those of you that are listening and those of you that are advocating for or against it, that the people on this side of the aisle support workers' compensation reform. I don't think there's any question about it. We have small business owners in this caucus. We all interact with small business owners and large business owners on a regular basis and understand 100% the need to do workers' compensation reform, support workers' compensation reform, have advocated for workers' compensation reform, have filed bills that outline workers' compensation reform, and will continue to push workers' compensation reform, regardless of our vote tonight. But one of the things that concerns our caucus is whether or not we have real workers' compensation reform before us in this chamber. And I think you've heard a variety of people speaking over the last couple of days, and the consensus by many people in this state is this bill is not real workers' compensation reform. And one of the things we've seen happen in this state over the last couple of years is the attempt to sell ideas or bills as real reform, when in reality they do nothing but look good on mail pieces and look good in the newspaper as headlines. I can remember the conversation a couple of months ago, maybe more like a year ago, year and a half, about the need to do real ethics reform in the state of Illinois. We did some ethics reform, but I think everybody in this building knows the real gist of what we needed to do involved whether or not the leaders had the ability to hand out money and in the amounts they handed out money and collecting of money, and we didn't address that. And while everybody went around patting themselves on the back for doing ethics reform, everybody in this building knew we really had not addressed the real problem, the real root of the problem, and we really didn't do real ethics reform. And while people talked about it, everybody knew it wasn't real. And I think that's the problem we have tonight. And as I listened to Representative Kaye, it occurred to me that in our attempt to sell reform and push ideas that we have the ability, and I guess it's human nature, to embellish the significance of what we're doing. And when you let Representative Kaye kind of drill down to the core of what's going on here, those numbers a couple of days ago suggested we have savings of $600 to $700, $800, $900 million, when in reality, when you look at the real numbers here, we may be lucky to get to $100 to $200 million in savings. And the reason we're not having real savings, and the other numbers I think we've seen have been embellished and manipulated, is because we are not getting to the root problems. Some would say we're nibbling around the edges. I alluded that to the other night. I'm not even sure we're getting around or nibbling around the edges. Think about what this bill does not contain, or what does it not do. This bill does not change in any way the culture of corruption that centers around or hovers around the world of workers' compensation in the state of Illinois that we are unfortunately familiar with. This bill does not contain anything with respect to the world of causation. So the person that plays football on Sunday afternoon and gets hurt and goes to work on Monday and says he or she has a workers' compensation injury, we don't address that under this bill. The very meat and potatoes of what we need to do, we don't touch it. We don't touch it. We embellish some numbers, but we don't go to the real root of the problem. There is a reason that the Caterpillars and the John Deeres and the NFIB and the Chamber of Commerce are not supporting this bill. Because they are the people that live this every day in their small and large businesses around the state of Illinois, and they know how people game the system. They know that people come in and say, I got hurt in work, when in reality, they got hurt over the weekend or at an earlier time in their life, and that this does nothing to that. Nothing in this bill addresses the issue of what we hear about in this building about PPO networks, or to stop the idea of doctor shopping. Another significant real life experience that businesses and employers face day-to-day that is not addressed in this bill at all. Causation, gone. PPO networks, doctor shopping, not in here. Then the other thing that we faced as a state recently is the issue that we heard about down at Menards, the fraudulent activity of certain doctors and attorneys and arbitrators. I haven't seen anything in this bill that goes to the root of that problem, and I would suggest that's something that needed to be addressed. What's the other big issue that every employer tells you about that needs to be involved in here and needs to be covered in here? AMA guidelines. The utilization of AMA guidelines. Everywhere else in the country where you have had significant reduction in cost expenses have implemented true, real AMA guidelines. The AMA guidelines that would, if been implemented in this bill, would have brought Caterpillar Tractor on board, John Deere on board, other businesses. Again, they live with this day to day. Caterpillar Tractor says if you have the same company in Illinois versus the same company in Indiana, you may pay $500,000 in Indiana to provide workers' compensation coverage to $3.5 million in the state of Illinois. One way to drop that is through AMA guidelines. Absolutely nothing in this bill. And then on the world of alcohol and drugs, the abuse that goes on in that is something you will hear almost from every employer you talk to, large and small. Not in any significant way is addressed in this bill. So whether it's causation, doctor shopping, Menards, AMA guidelines, alcohol and drugs, they are not addressed. So what do we have? What do we have? Especially in light of what Representative Kaye just outlined. Embellished, it's the kindest he's going to say it. He has a lot of respect for the sponsor, but someone's manipulated these numbers. They're not real, they don't work, and so we're left with a product that does very little to help us in a state that is already struggling with awful tax policy, awful regulatory policy, awful litigation policy, and yet we at best nibble around the edges. I get this at the end of the day, you ought to think about why are the trial lawyers in this state and the unions in this state not objecting to this bill and are neutral? That speaks volumes. They're not objecting to this bill because it does nothing at all in the way of reform. And I guess if I was a business owner, the thing that might scare me the most, and with all due respect to the person that's going to do it, we're about to have a governor that has not demonstrated any, in my very humble opinion, any recognition or understanding of the significance of business in the state of Illinois with some of the policies that have come out of his office. That applies to small business and large business, medium-sized business. You are now allowing this governor to appoint every arbitrator under the workers' compensation system. If you were an employer in the state of Illinois, I don't think you would find that very comforting. Every new arbitrator in the state of Illinois' workers' compensation system will be appointed by this governor. And I don't think anybody in this room would suggest that he has been the biggest friend of business to the state of Illinois. So this bill is lacking woefully in doing what it needs to do. The numbers at best get us to 200 or 300 at best. It lacks a variety of areas that need to be addressed, and that's a shame we didn't do that. The process didn't work its way through like it should have, and that's unfortunate. So at the end of the day, I know that people are going to want to take a victory lap. I know there's some people who have worked on this a lot, and I appreciate that. But this is not reform. It doesn't look like reform. It doesn't smell like reform. It isn't reform, and that's a shame because we had an opportunity to just do something very real here today. And I think most of the people in this building know that, and I'm hopeful that someday we'll get back to having a real discussion on making sure that Caterpillars of the state of Illinois want to stay and do business here in Illinois, and this is a way we could have gotten that done.